It was recently announced that Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry has signed a bill that would implement Protestant translations of the Ten Commandments in any educational institution that receives public funding, whether it be public schools, colleges, universities, research institutions, so on and so forth. Now, this move has, of course, predictably been challenged by the ACLU and other groups who have filed a lawsuit claiming that it harms conscience and that it's coercive. And this has, of course, caused a lot of conversation, not just in general in the political discourse, but especially on the political right. And I think what a lot of people on the right who support this are forgetting is that America is so fundamentally unique in how we handle matters of faith and matters of culture that we can't appeal to traditions outside of our nation, nor can we appeal to our own personal moral tastes and sensibilities when making policy. So I'm going to explore this issue, the controversy around it, and I'm going to argue that while I believe the 10th Commandments most certainly belong in American society, and I'll explain why in a second, they don't belong in institutions of education that are funded by the government, or really, in any case where the means of delivering them are through taxpayer money or whatever. But before we get into that, let me just say hello, hello, hello. I am Christian Watson. Thank you guys for being here. If you enjoy political commentary and social commentary with a philosophical bent, I would encourage you to subscribe. Even if you disagree with me, disagreement is the refinement of the mind. If it is done right and it's done civilly, so I would encourage you all to subscribe, share, like, comment, do whatever you can. Let us get this message out there. It is dynamite, my friends. You will not get this from anywhere else. Now let's talk about this issue more in context. So whenever we're dealing with a contentious issue of any sort, whether it be philosophical, whether it be social, whether it be institutional, I don't care what it is, it always helps us to assign an advocate to the side we're planning to critique. This way, you avoid the sin of straw manning, which unfortunately is a cardinal aspect of many political conversations today. You avoid the sin of uncharitability, which is where a lot of misunderstanding arises. If you're not charitable towards your interlocutor, you will not understand your interlocutor. Therefore, you will understand what you think about your interlocutor. You will understand your version of what they said in your head, and you will then make an argument built on sticks, which we don't want, on stilts, so to speak. So it's very important just to have an advocate. So there are a few people in the discourse that have made points supporting the measure in Louisiana that I think are quite interesting and deserve to be engaged with. Yoram Hazony, who is a popular sort of, quote-unquote, he calls himself a national conservative, which actually, by the way, is not actual American conservatism. It's an attempt to impose British conservatism upon America and convince us that America is somehow a British traditionalist society, when in all reality, that's the exact opposite of what's true, but that's a different story, different day. Ramazoni made a comment on Twitter where he said, and I quote, "You can't be a conservative and oppose posting the 10 Commandments in schools." He goes on, "There is a tradition, a political tradition, that supported stripping public education clean of any reference to God in Scripture in the name of neutrality. It's called liberalism." Now, Hazony does not define what version of liberalism he's talking about, which is one of the problems with these people that always want to attack liberalism as a negative thing. I have to ask you, what do you mean liberalism? Do you mean post-1940s New Deal FDR liberalism, which is not liberal whatsoever, but it's actually quite progressive, and might I even say regressive, which is an entirely different tradition of thought? Do you mean liberal in terms of being permissive with social behaviors that are not so good? Do you mean classical liberalism, which absolutely is the fountain from which the American tradition and our institutions and our social values historically have flowed from? What do you mean? He probably means classical liberalism, and in that case, he is mistaken in trying to draw a distinction between classical liberalism and conservatism in the American sense. They are one and the same, because to be an American conservative means you wish to conserve the values of the founding, which then means you wish to conserve classically liberal premises. So that's one thing I don't like about this response. But we're going to view this in the context of other responses as well. Allie Beth Stuckey, who is a popular conservative Christian podcaster, she had the sensibility that this move is just, not because it's against liberalism, but because the Ten Commandments are true and good, And the law should be the vehicle by which the true and good move and implement itself into society. There are other folks like Aaron McIntyre, a very popular guy who everyone likes to quote. For some reason, that just goes beyond me. He's very smart, but he's also very wrong on so many issues. And he has said that the objections to this are simple libertarianism, and they are weak and they are futile. So in all of these different responses here that have been coming up on these very big figures on the right, I've noticed something. I've noticed something that's actually quite interesting. I've noticed a few things actually. Number one, I've noticed a lack of reference to first principles. See, whenever it comes to a contentious issue that has political import, you must understand two things: categories and principles. Categories are simply easy ways that we as human beings are able to understand and organize the world, organize a concept, which is why categorical thinking is one of the most powerful tools to use if you wish to tackle any issue, because it makes your thoughts organized, which then can make your thoughts more rational if they are made in the right way, and that can also make your thoughts more effective and more in tune with reality, which also helps other people who are struggling conceptually with a certain thing. But then we have principles. Without principles, categories are empty. They have nothing. They have no concepts. They have no ammunition by which to be used, so they become impotent. So categories are dependent fundamentally on principles, things and ideas that constitute the world, that constitute a particular subject in the world, and are accessible through our reason or through some other way of us engaging with knowledge. Because there's the rational mind, and there's also the emotional mind, the mind of the heart. And the mind of the heart can also engage with knowledge in a fruitful way as well, but it's better if the mind of the heart is situated firmly and allied with, tied to the rational mind. So we've set this up. These responses aren't doing any of that. These responses are solely remaining within the realm of the heart and the sensibility, which is where your emotions are, it's where your tastes are, it's where your preferences are. We see a lot about how preference is somehow a divine quality these days, how preference is somehow a moral demand these days. Well, I prefer this, or I prefer that, and you need to respect that. No, respect is a mutual process that demands of both parties involved in respecting that they A, have an understanding of each other, and B, exercise that understanding within the confines of that relationship. Respect is not a tool to be used against people who disagree with your lifestyle to make them want to agree with you. Different story, different day. So they are solely going in the realm of the heart and tastes, and they are missing the philosophical issues and the rational issues surrounding this move. Very simply, my friends, the Ten Commandments and any other religious doctrine, the merits of the Ten Commandments are separate from if the proper delivery mechanism for the Ten Commandments to be in our schools or in any public institution is moral. Those are two separate issues. I personally believe the Ten Commandments, many of them, all of them, I would say, are moral because I have a Christian worldview. I hold it deep to my heart. But that Christian worldview is relegated to me and my heart. I have no interest in going around proselytizing in a forceful way my Christian worldview. Having said that, my Christian worldview, or no worldview for that example, is going to be aptly delivered or morally delivered or effectively delivered by way of coercion. And this is the central issue. The issue here with the Ten Commandments being in Louisiana schools, or any schools that are public, is fundamentally an issue of conscience. Do pupils have the right to have an education that is as neutral as possible insofar as it does not promote tastes or personal values that may go against what their parents believe, may go against what they personally believe in their heart, but instead goes towards ideas that are general, concise, unambiguous, and universal, insofar as these ideas help mold the man. Education is not necessarily just about religion, or it can be. Education, especially education in the manner that best refines the mind, is primarily about your ability to grasp general concepts, all concepts. When I say it's important to have neutrality in education, I don't mean it's important not to instill values in people's minds. That's not what I'm saying, because education itself is a value. What I'm saying is the values ought to be as objective and generalized as possible so that it can encompass all worldviews, which I believe the American worldview does. and personal preferences like religion have no place in that unless they are forwarded in a way that does not violate conscience. The moment you violate conscience is the moment you commit a moral error. And what all these people are basically arguing is that violating conscience is strong and it promotes a positive vision for the future. Or they may even not agree that it's violating conscience. But effectively, to have this up on the wall in a school by mandate, by decree, for all to see is a government endorsement of a particular worldview. And that government endorsement of a particular worldview may not jive with the worldview of the kids in that classroom. But there's also a bigger issue that I think is very important to understand, and it's an issue, deeper issue, of toleration. So the spirit of Americanism, my friends, is one of rational toleration. Let's walk through this concept for a second. So rational toleration, contrary to the leftist viewpoint of toleration, which is infused with identity, which is infused with coercion, which disrespects the conscience of people that do not agree with certain beliefs or ideas. The American version of tolerance is one that is respecting of conscience. It's one that is respecting of conscience in the environment of goodwill. Not only do you respect my conscience, that's the bare minimum, but you also have a charitability and a love for me as a human being that allows our respects to be something more than just a limiting thing. It's something that allows us to grow together, and that's civilization. The ethos of civilization is cooperation. So goodwill is the glue that binds together cooperation, which is the necessary component of a social order. But what's happening in Louisiana violates goodwill because it seeks to impose a particular set of principles upon someone by force in the classroom. It is neither conservative, nor is it traditional to the American ethos. It is a violation of conscience, this law. Furthermore, and this is the bigger issue I want to talk about here, religion and politics are two categorically separate things. This is why politics is a horrific vehicle for religion to go through, because the norms of power and the norms of God are so different that oftentimes history will show us that the norms of power oftentimes corrupt and misdirect the norms and ideas of God, whether it be promising soldiers during the Crusades that if they go kill people, they will get into heaven, whether it be using the church as a means to control what if royals get married or who they get married to. I don't care what it is, whether it be using the church as a means to suppress religious minorities, which happened in Britain in the 17th and the 16th centuries, which is one of the reasons why William Penn came over to America to found Pennsylvania, because they basically gave William Penn a free berth to get out of Britain because they were tired of him showing up to trials and questioning why his friends, who were Christians, were getting persecuted by the Church of England or by other forces in England. Well, I don't care what it is. Religion and politics, when they come together, oftentimes, the latter tends to corrode the former. And it becomes less about what God wants or what religion demands and more about what those in power can use for religion to be a useful tool for them. It is the most sacrilegious. It is the most offensive. It is the most contradictory premise to suggest that the government has a role of promoting a positive vision that involves personal morality and religion. It just doesn't, because it can't do it by its very nature. When religious authorities are empowered to dictate faith in the public sphere, faith ceases to be a personal issue and it becomes a political issue. So, with that in mind, I want to take you all to two seminal lights of the American experiment, Joseph Priestley and Richard Price, both of whom, Priestley was a deist, Richard Price was a pastor, a very strong Christian, a Protestant, of course, and they were both philosophers. Both of these men had an outsized impact on Thomas Jefferson and several other founders. Both of these men's works were contained in the libraries of the American founding fathers. These men and their sentiments helped shape the American ethos surrounding religion and conscience. So let me first read a quote from Joseph Priestley's wondrous work called The Essay of the First Principles of Government, Chapter 5, which is titled Of Religious Liberty and Toleration in General. Priestley says the following when it comes to civil authority interacting with religion. Quote, the most important question concerning the extent of civil government is whether the civil magistrate ought to extend his authority to matters of religion. And the only method of deciding this important question, as it appears to me, is to have recourse at once to first principles. You see what he's saying? He's going outside of his own opinion. Ali Beth Stuckey and Holmes Zoney and Aaron McIntyre, listen very closely. He's going outside of his own opinion, and he's appealing to the universal, which is what must be done in order to mediate social disputes. Otherwise, you have a society of factionalism, not a society of brothers. He continues, and the ultimate rule concerning everything that respects society, whether such interference of the civil magistrate appears to be in the public good. And all arguments a priori in matters of policy are apt to be fallacious. Fact and experience are our only safe guides. He goes on, civil and religious matters seem so distinct that it can only be in very uncommon emergencies, where, for instance, religious quarrels amongst members of the state are very high, that the civil magistrate can have any call or pretense for interfering with religion. All civil societies we enter into this life will be dissolved by death. When this life is over, I shall not be able to claim any privileges of an Englishman. I shall not be bound by any of the laws of England, nor shall I owe any allegiance to its sovereign. When therefore my situation is a future life shall have no connection with my privileges or obligations as an Englishman, why should those persons who make laws for Englishmen interfere with my conduct with respect to a state, i.e. heaven, to which their power does not extend? The point here is this. If the material world and the spiritual world are different, this is sometimes called the two kingdoms theory, then it makes sense that there should be a barrier of separation, and there should be an internal regulation system with each of those. As a Christian, you are called to the city of God, or whatever you like it. As a citizen in the world, you are called to obey the laws that are moral. And so this point Priestley is making was endemic to the founding generation's thinking about religion in America. I'll quickly read Price. Price said in his Discourse on Love of Our Country, he said, if there is a governor of the world, God, who directs all events, he ought to be invoked and worshipped. And those who dislike that mode of worship, which is prescribed by public authority, ought, if they can find no worship out of the church which they approve, to set up a separate worship for themselves. And by doing this, and giving an example of a rational and manly worship, men of weight from their rank or literature may do the greatest service to the society in the world. They may bear a testimony against that application of civil power to the support of particular modes of faith, which obstruct human improvement and perpetuates error. Why does the government picking out one faith or the other faith and obstruct human improvement and perpetuate error? Because it violates conscience. And without a conscience, a man cannot be a man. That is the very simple reason. Now, Price goes on in this essay to talk about the need for a vigorous social order rooted in religion. And this is what the title of my video means. The Ten Commandments belong in America. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not covet. Thou shalt not commit adultery. These are principles that go way beyond the Bible and can be basic secular motifs by which to live by that undoubtedly produce a more just and a more moral society. I speak at very great length about the idea of a natural law. Now, I personally believe that natural law is rooted in the transcendent, personal, one and only God, Jesus. But even if you don't believe the same thing I do, natural law itself is simply a set of principles that are inherent to reality, accessible to man through reason, and that govern reality no matter what someone's opinion says. Therefore, all men, regardless of what they believe, regardless of what their religious sensibility is, are subject to natural law and can therefore follow natural law and proselytize natural law. Justification on a metaphysical level doesn't matter ultimately. What matters is your observance of moral principles in the society, how you conduct yourself as a human being. That is what we need in our society. So on a private level, on a social level that has nothing to do with politics, the best way to deliver this into our society is going to be by proselytizing the virtues of the Ten Commandments, proselytizing the virtues of natural law to people, and if they don't want to listen to you, that's fine. But if they do, that's even greater. That is how you keep matters of faith from being corrupted by matters of politics. And that is how you create a stable religious order that is not dependent on the batons of those in power who wish to wave their hand and just inspire a sense of religious fervor in people's hearts. That's how you keep these delicate matters from their grasp as well. One last thing on this issue of conservatism and religion. So, the claim that you cannot be a conservative, and I kind of address this as well, and also not want to have forced violations of conscience called, religious indoctrination in schools, is absolutely laughable. But it oftentimes comes from this notion of the Anglo-American conservative. You may have heard this term, Anglo-American. Well, the term Anglo simply refers to the lands of Britain, and it also, by consequence, refers to the traditions of Britain, and it refers to the voices of those traditions. In this case, when talking about conservatism, would be Edmund Burke. Perhaps in the land of Edmund Burke, it would not be conservative not to support the state or the government going into the private sphere, invading the most sacred matter that belongs to us, our faith, and enforcing a certain idea upon people. Like, that's actually quite conservative for Britain, because that country has a long history of doing that to people. No offense to my English fans, I love you guys, but it's just the truth. Like, we literally, there were colonists that literally came over from your country to establish colonies here in the Americas that eventually became states because they couldn't worship their religion in peace, and they were Christians too. So while it may be a British thing to do, in some sense, some odd sense of the word, in the sense of America, we have a very defined tradition. We have a very set trajectory. We have a very core set of values in this country and this land, and in this country and this land, we don't force people to believe certain things. In this country and this land, we don't use power as a tool of moral proselytizing or moral management. In this country and this land, we do not hold government as the voice of God. We hold the scriptures, we hold the canons we believe, we hold the prophets, we hold whatever we believe as the voice of God to us. In this country and this land, we do not violate goodwill for the good of society, to do good. We instead use goodwill as a means of delivering moral ideas and virtuous ideas to our people. In this country and this land, conservatism is to conserve universal principles, not to conserve traditions that are not tested by those principles and are therefore accepted on the basis of habituation, a philosophically dead proposition. In this country and this land, we respect conscience. So I submit to you, my friends, for all these reasons, we ought to keep the Ten Commandments in society, but we ought to reject any attempt to force them, even if it's a passive kind of forcing, like putting them in a public education facility, upon the youth of this country or upon anyone in this country. Let conscience and reason be the guide of people, and allow virtue to be proselytized through those who are in their lives and those who care about them or those who see them. That would be the best way to have a society where the good, as Miss Stuckey said, is prioritized. My friends, like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can to keep this message out there. I love you guys so much. Study history, study philosophy, remain morally convicted, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.